out where everybody is coming in from. Yep. Again, just waiting for Meticulous to come on. I am going to... and you can hear me okay, everybody, yes? Johannesburg. Aha. Yeah. I have to say that South Africa has always been one of my favorite places. I almost lived, I almost moved there. India. Ah, how are you? Yeah, which part? Down south or further up north? Ah, excellent. Good. Good. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the latest article today. And yeah, excellent.
Hello, so it works.
Yeah.
This is great.
Okay. So how are you today?
Great. Always great to be here. Extremely happy to be here because this is an opportunity for me to just zoom out and focus on things that really matter in a very cognitive way without having to justify my wayward intellectual inclinations. This is a place where you can feel comfortable to think and ask questions within questions. And it's my experience that when you do that in a regular, common public setting, you lose people because ain't nobody got time for this. You have to, what are you doing? But at the same time, and it's especially with articles like this one this week, challenging necrotechnology. Um, I appreciate that you focused on the etymological definition of the concept of techne, which is
Mm-hmm.
modes of knowledge, modes of uh, meaning, how to create meaning. Techne being knowledge,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and the knowledge that you present in this article this week is um, rightfully qualified by you as knowledge that has been occulted in some way,
Yes.
that has become obscured to the commoner, the common sense, obscured to
Mm-hmm.
the common
Mm-hmm.
sense, which then you introduce the term of esotericism, esotericization, as the
Mm-hmm.
process that you shed light on in this article. And I find that to be fascinating because the concept and the notion of esoteric, a bit
Mm-hmm.
like the notion of conspiracy theory, that very expression has been used to
Mm-hmm.
describe not just uh, thematic areas
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
interest, but also individuals, peoples who one wants to disqualify from polite society, and who one wants to discredit from being subject to concerns of polite society.
Mm-hmm.
The
Mm-hmm.
esoteric is unscrutable. The
Mm-hmm.
esoteric is something uh, uh, dirty, nasty, something forbidden, prohibited, something within a taboo zone, something for which one might get punished or ostracized for concerning oneself with.
Mm-hmm.
And you center in this particular article this week
Mm-hmm.
um, the practices that we are all involved and immersed in, but never reflect. What is it they say about the fish in water? That the fish doesn't concern itself with the water it swims in. It may not even be able to distinguish its environment
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in that sense because it exists therein, and all around it, all it has ever known is that. So it might be blind to it, much as humans are blind to oxygen,
Mm-hmm.
without which we
Yes.
still wouldn't
Yes.
exist.
Yeah, we don't
And
realize that we actually live in a sea, right?
yes,
So the fish live
yes,
in the sea. We live in the sea. It has weight. If we didn't have pressure inside of us, we would collapse, right?
exactly, exactly.
So yeah, yeah.
And Dystopia Unmasked is about unveiling. It's about making visible. It's about making palpable. It's about making uh, perceptible to our minds uh, what is masked. And you do that brilliantly in this particular article. I just want to say that the job description given
Mm-hmm.
in the name of the collective to unmask aspects of the dystopia, you stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it serves as a contract, dear
Mm-hmm.
audience. There is a contract in the name Dystopia Unmasked. Is that the effort being made here serves the purpose of unmasking not only aspects of our reality that are masked, but also those aspects that we do not even realize that we have internalized as part of the fractal identities, that we've internalized them to the point that we take them for granted. They've become what Jung called part of our not subconscious but of our collective unconscious. It's
Mm-hmm.
unconscious, we just live in it, like money,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and like the techne, the patterns of knowledge that have woven an economic system in which we live. And so this article was an unraveling, was an undoing, an unveiling of important aspects of this economic system that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
You, I suggested to you that there were three pillars in this article, and I got some positive feedback for that. The first pillar that I see in this article is, of course, the question of money and usury, that dynamic, the
Mm-hmm.
nature, the attributes of money and usury, and that has actually a civilizational touch to it. The way you discuss it, we'll discover that in this conversation. The second pillar that I saw was the description of transformation in history, of a transformation from material, palpable, physical economics, day
Mm-hmm.
to day
Mm-hmm.
physical economics, to a digital, not immaterial, but to a digital, desubstantiated uh, form of economics.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that process you call the esotericization. The esotericization process from the physical material to the uh, I don't want to say ephemeral, it's not correct, but to the digital. You just
Yes. I
refer
mean,
to it
that's
as
that's
digital.
how I ended up using words like esotericization
Hmm.
and occult, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
yeah, because basically what happened is that the money was occulted. It was
Hmm.
moved into
Hmm.
an invisible realm, right?
Yes, with rules and regulations therein,
Yeah.
that accrue to those in the know of these rules, interesting sort of
Mm-hmm.
benefits and
Mm-hmm.
powers that
Mm-hmm.
you talk about in the article.
Mm-hmm.
And the third aspect of this article is the very sort of, if you blink, you miss it, the
Mm-hmm.
very light aspect of the epistemological freedom, the
Mm-hmm.
epistemological freedom to think about why things are as they are
Mm-hmm.
and to question that. You have a very interesting question in this third pillar that I wrote down from the article. You say, we do not always have to ask questions to find solutions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we must ask questions to identify what the solutions cannot
Let's
be.
see. Yeah.
I think, when I was a kid, our philosophy teacher taught us that you go from the concrete, the most palpable in an article, to the least tangible as you progress with your arguments. And I felt reminded of that when I read this article, because it went from very concrete to highly complex and abstract, the digital realm of our economic system. And then you went into philosophical kind of leanings and questions, suggesting that it's the way we think that must be interrogated as well, not just
Yeah.
the economic system we live in.
Yeah.
And I enjoy this read very much, I must say. So, with
Mhm.
this said and done, um, before we get into the nitty gritty of this, do you want to make some points regarding the collective's work, Dystopia Unmasked, at this point?
Well, I think that that when we formed Dystopia Unmasked, because it was history. It was myself and Khadija, my daughter, in our
Mm-hmm.
conversations, we decided to start a newsletter and the collective.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, but I wanted to do the newsletter. They advised me very strongly against it because of the implications on time and energy.
Yes,
But
it's a lot of work.
yeah, so anyway, so we started that. But the thing about the collective is that we are a group of people looking at our world. I mean, we're talking about necropolitics in our world. We're looking at the dystopian necropolitical nature of our world organized as death worlds for exclusion and inclusion. Um, because when we're talking about the esotericization of money, so the moving of money into an invisible realm, right? Increasingly under the control of a specialized esoteric elite, right? Who understand it, who designed it, and who understand it. And increasingly in each stage, they have more control over the money, right? Until now, we're talking about central bank currency, right? Which because money, one of the things about money is that you could own your wealth. The thing about central bank currency is that you no longer will own your wealth, right? Your wealth is a privilege, right? That can be taken away from you by just denying you access to your account or deleting it, right? Which, when your wealth was in your safe, right, it was safe. And so we formed Dystopia Unmasked to be able to talk about these things and to overgrow them, right? Because we don't want to be here in opposition to something, right? Because that is a reactive mode of life, right? That mode of life requires that you have an enemy, right? So we're talking about a mode of life in which you see something that you understand is unjust and you don't like, and you overgrow it. Okay. And so that it forces the other, if it wishes to maintain that, to be the one that becomes reactive. So then you write the story, right? So this is part of what we were doing with our conception of overgrowing, and to really bring from that, to bring forth an another politique, right? Without the declared goal of actually wanting to become political in that sense, because in the sense is that we want to live and we want people around us to live. Okay, so it's a different approach to politics, which I think yourself, as a peace researcher, would more so understand. So that's how we got here, and so we've been running. Because I think one time you asked me, "What, do you have a political program?" I said no, right? um, and so I sometimes would imagine that would be very difficult to believe. I don't have a political program, right? I want to live and I want people to live. And so so that's what the Dystopian Mask Collective comes out of. And our for this first part of the year, we're going to be looking at necropolitics, and in this one, we looked at necrotechnology and really wanted to look at the nature of technology, moving technology from being the idea of just artifacts, right? That really to understand that the artifact itself is the locus of a whole connected set of relationships and systems of signs, right? Which organize people to leverage their reality. And so, you got to look at, because at the end of it, at the core of it, at the core of technology is the human being. Okay, so it's either about extending the capacities of the human being or limiting them. So in that sense, when we're talking about biotechnology, we're talking about facilitating, because bio means life, facilitating human beings in full life, right? And necro is in which you want to ensure that you limit the life force of people and ultimately sometimes extinguish the life force of people. And that there are certain aspects of the human being which you force to be repressed, not because it is healthy for it to be repressed, but because it is not politically expedient or economically expedient for it to be expressed. Okay? And so that's why we're talking about biotechnology and necrotechnology, and you'll see that the meanings we have in it are a bit different from what might be spoken about normally. I mean, what I'm talking about here is more in line with Foucault and his student Akili Mbembe, but it's actually, there are some aspects of it in which we depart from Foucault. Yeah. Can't hear you.
Oh, I had my microphone off. Now
Yeah.
that what you've just said is so important. It's so important because um so first of all, the Achille Mbembe's utilization of necropolitics allows those of us in the West and uh, in the West and off the West, if that distinction can be made, because you can be in the West and have the West within you, but not be off the West.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm simply trying to say as a prefatory remark here is the West has a core and a periphery.
Mm-hmm.
And you can sense that historical reality
Mm-hmm.
in the strengthening of the white supremacy discourse, of the populist right-wing xenophobic discourses in the West, in the racializing culturalist discourses that are strengthening in the West, where you might be a Westerner, but if you don't look the part, if you're not blonde, blue-eyed, Danish looking something, you might be questioned. And we already had strong elements of that during the economic crisis in 2008, when Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, and then we can put Ireland at the end. But Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal, or if you spell it the right way, you get Greece, Italy, Portugal, Spain, and then you add Ireland, you get the gypsy. Somebody did a play on that acronym just to pinpoint that there are several ways of defining the West and seeing the global North. There are lines of division within the West. And they came to be seen in that economic crisis. But I just say that for context, for a
All right.
larger context. The point I wanted to salute you for is the distinction y- that this collective makes between biopolitics and necropolitics, where your definition or this definition of biopolitics is not so traditional in the Foucauldian sense, where Foucault meant biopolitics as the management of life by the government, by the state, the management of a population's life expectancy and quality of life, which, as you rightfully just said, can consist in increasing the quality of life or decreasing it for specific populations. And I was thinking that in 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 congruence with how you speak of it, I was reminded of salutogenesis. It's a concept that was put out there by Aaron Antonovsky, the salutogenetic dimension of political action or of collective action, which is how does it increase health and life? Um, and that would be a sort of a specific pinpointing, as you put it, to increase life and improve life. So
Yes.
I found Aaron Antonovsky's Salutogenesis, which I strongly suggest people to look up, very close, or the closest thing that I've read to what you are suggesting.
Yeah.
The parameters of enhancement of life, the parameters of improvement of life, not in a not in a contestatory approach, but in a confirming approach of life.
Yes. So in a way, what I'm saying is that we have to become the human beings who go beyond revolution,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
Because Foucault, okay, I love Foucault,
Hmm.
but Foucault is trapped in the discourse of power,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
and
Hmm.
so he moves from the discourse in the discourse of power, and he starts to talk about the microtization of power, right? So that
Hmm.
power increasingly, or one way we can look at it is that power increasingly is almost outsourced from the state and it becomes embedded in the very processes, right? The control processes are embedded increasingly in the people and the systems, okay? And
You by the way, you just pinpointed it. Foucault is about power and control.
yeah,
And of course a critical stance to it, but he's really about thinking about power and
yeah,
control.
and
Hmm.
and really about I mean, in a Nietzschean sense, he's about the genealogy of that, which is an archaeological approach to history, which is
Hmm.
able to look at meta histories, what is left out of the histories, right?
Yes.
What is not considered, right?
Hmm.
In order to
Hmm.
get a picture, a fuller picture and context.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
so what we are doing is saying, well, yeah, but at the center of this is the human being, right? The state is a machine for for en- enrolling the power that of the human being into itself, right? It suppresses aspects of it and says, no, no, no. We have the state has the right, the exclusive right on violence. Okay. And it may lease it out.
Hmm.
And a classic example of that in the United States is that in the United States, the National Rifle Association protects the right to bear arms.
Yes.
But when Black people began, in the time of the Black Panthers, began to bear arms, they turned it round. They changed their position, right?
Mm.
They were
Mm.
no longer about the right to bear arms anymore because the wrong kind of people were bearing arms. This is the essence of necropolitics, okay? So it's about maintaining a peculiar order to the society. And if And when I talk about fractal identities, what it does is that essentially it is about co-opting identities so that it maintains power, and it's built on whites. However, you will often see that it has excluded particular communities of whites, and it is a very amorphous, because it is about power. Okay, when it went to Africa, it began to talk about the Hamitic hypothesis, right? So it began to recruit Africans into whiteness, right? So the Ethiopians and so on are Caucasoids. The Rwandans are the Tutsis are Caucasoids, right? They're just hidden Caucasoids, right? They're just hidden. Yeah. I mean, this is the kind of language they were using. I mean, it's nuts, right? Yeah. So they were actually, in other words, they were hidden Europeans, right? They were black, but they were hidden Europeans. So look at the skull. The skull is closer to us. So they began to sort. They even began to sort and manage the population to produce the right kind of genetics in order to affirm the hypothesis, which resulted in the Rwandan genocide, because when they realized that the people that they were claiming that were closer to them were not going to enhance their power, they switched it to the Hutus, and then switched the narrative so that these people were now invaders, right? So the Hamitic hypothesis, no, those are the invaders, and they came and they took your things. Okay, so the guy who's taking your things is telling you that those guys are taking your things, right? And so you see that this is a discourse about power. Okay, and so I think we have to get to the foundations, the ur foundations of power, and the ur foundations of power in a capitalist, mercantilist, and neoliberal system is the financial system and its take on the nature of money its control of markets.
Masterful transition. I didn't see that coming. And it's to the point. Just for the audience again, for those who may not have caught it, because you just slid it in so smoothly. You're saying that we're dealing with money and with the economic mode of production, of extraction, production, transformation, utilization, consumption, and of course, what's the word I'm looking for? Discarding of waste. So all of this chain ties into the power of the economic mode that we've agreed on.
Yes.
And money plays a role. Can you? This brings us to the first pillar. What is money? Why is money? And how has money evolved?
Okay, so when we talk about money, usually in economics textbooks, they tell you that money is a medium of exchange.
A quantum, I remember many years ago. A quantum, they taught us money was.
Yeah. So Rwanda, again, because I'm looking at Rwanda at present, and the pre-colonial kingdom of Rwanda, the ultimate money was the cow.
The cow, exactly.
Right. Then the smaller change were goats and so on, right, and smaller animals, and so your money was your food. Okay. And the internationally accepted mode of money ended up being gold and silver, right, because of the nature of those metals. However, money was always a fairly flexible category, because sometimes people stored grain, so sometimes they would pay in grain. Okay, so there's this capacity to shift across, which then allowed people to preserve their wealth fairly flexibly. What happens in in the rise of in the European, in the expansion for after 1490 and after the 1400s, right? Because it started before 1492. In the European expansion, which was about the control of trade routes and the acquisition and storage of gold and silver, is that they began increasingly to fix the zone of what money was. And then, so as a technology of controlling trade routes, they developed the technology of the control of money.
Yes.
And then, in the article I spoke about, there is a verse in the Quran where Allah says, they say that trade is like usury, right? So they conflate fixing. Okay, I have to tell you what usury is. It's really interesting. Is that usury essentially is many methods of fixing structural injustice into the practices of trade as trade, right? So one, treating commodities against their nature. So if I sell you an apple, the purpose to have an apple is to eat it, right? So I can't rent you an apple. I can't say, look, I'll give you 10 apples, give me back 12 apples tomorrow. Right? You can't rent it like that. That's not allowed. It's a property that is consumed in its nature. So that the gold and the silver were seen like that. The purpose of the commodity when it was in your hand was to spend it. So you can't go back to somebody afterwards. Like you can't go back to an apple and go, okay, tomorrow, give me that. So what they did is they found all sorts of ways of fudging that. So you attach a time value to money, right? Like you attach a time value to apples, right? And all of this stuff in order to be able to rent money, right? And so what it arose eventually was the institution of the bank, which provided one safekeeping and then leveraged a nation or community's wealth against itself by charging them interest, by renting them their money back to them. Okay?
Yes.
And then, so the point of this was that once this had happened, then they began to issue receipts. Then they realized that they could leverage the receipts,
yes,
because the receipts were functioning as money.
Yes.
And so once the volume of receipts had exceeded the volume of money, which meant that it was fraud. Okay. So they were fraudulently expanding the money supply. Okay, which is fraud and theft. So what happened is that even this fraud was hardwired into the legal system as more structural, as more structural injustice. Okay, and then once that had happened, which we call now, once it happened, they decoupled the actual real commodity wealth from the token receipt. So then the receipts represented nothing. Okay, and this they call fiat money, the money of trust, because you trusted that it was something, right? So the money then became a very fluid pointer to wealth. Okay, because at the end of it, it was about sucking the wealth of other places into the metropolis, into nations at the center, into certain kinds of nations, and using war as a means of controlling trade routes. The point is wealth. It's not war, right? War is useful. War is as useful as peace. So this time we are seeing that the Americans are losing the peace for their hegemony. So they move into war because they cannot dominate economically in peace. Right? So the point is that you have to keep your eye on the trade routes. That's why we talk about supply chains. Okay. And we have to, so then once the money is now decoupled as paper money from real wealth, then it becomes digitized. At this point, it becomes occult. Because when it is, before it was digitized, I could bury paper money under my floorboards and my grandchildren could dig it up. Once it becomes digital, it means that you are now utterly dependent upon the bank. So you saw the bank coming to serve, it came as a service, and increasingly gathers power into itself until you cannot even have wealth without it. It's embedded. And so at this point, we see the technology that develops amongst banks of the central bank, right, which enters into a peculiar relationship with the state, and they hate public ownership of central banks, right? The European liberal elite, or the European elite, not only liberal, hate public ownership of the central bank. And so central banks are generally privately owned. Get that in your head. Central banks are usually privately owned.
Just
Go on.
Just a tiny illustration of that. I remember when we were watching, scrutinizing the evolution of the war in Libya in 2011. It was quite surprising to us that the first thing that the rebels did when they got hold of the capital was to secure the central bank. Their first move. It wasn't some strategically important roadway or, interrupting communication pathways. It was to get a hold of the central bank. And that was the first piece of information that we got. We had a team that was watching the evolution of the Libyan crisis. And when that came in as the first thing, everyone at the table was surprised.
Yeah.
We were surprised and not surprised, because if you understand what's going on, that is the confirmation of hegemonic control at the economic level.
Yeah, because this technique, if you want to understand this technique, study the history of Haiti. Haiti is not peripheral to the development of this. Study the history of Haiti. The history of Haiti is absolutely key. Get out of your head this whole black-white thing. No, look at Haiti. Haiti is about human beings, about the application of a system of necropolitics, which distinguishes people by color, but which will always be used to distinguish people in ways that extend power, wealth, and control. That's it.
That's it.
Okay? You have to get it.
That's it.
Okay?
That's it.
So if you want to understand the technology of dealing with third world nations, etc., I mean, even the term third world, right? You must understand the history of Haiti. You understand when they invaded Haiti under Smedley Butler, who realized he was working for Citibank, the first thing they did was they took the central bank and they confiscated the gold, and that was exported to New York to set up Citibank.
There you go.
Okay? Now, Citibank is the most important operator in Islamic banking. Get that in your head. So when they're talking about but which is a misnomer, right? Islamic banking is not possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm.
The
Oh,
so
don't let this escape our attention. What did you just say? You said Islamic banking is a misnomer, is an oxymoron.
yeah, it's not possible. It you know the whole understanding of the bank
Mm-hmm.
is completely usurious,
You know,
right? So
I say this because I ask you to zoom in on this because I have spent at least 15 hours of my life reading papers titled Islamic banking, pros and cons, for example.
yeah, I really that's why I went in for a definition of usury,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
That is the fundamental issue of it's just the fundamental issue of just economy,
Of a just
treating
economy.
yeah
Of a
of
just economy.
treating commodities by their nature and treating contracts by their nature in ways that they remain just and they do not embed structural injustice. Once you do that, the whole premise of banking disappears.
Hmm.
Okay.
Just to make sure that we continue your train of thought, you were talking about Citibank and how Citibank became a holding of, you did say,
Haitian gold. That is the gold of the Haitian nation.
that was the first part. And then you moved on in the second part to tie Citibank to the Islamic world.
Yes, I'm saying that basically what I'm saying is these are
Hmm.
predatory institutions
Hmm.
that they are meant to control your economy. So they don't have a problem. They'll move on to anything. That's my point. Okay.
I
So
have a I have a thought that's sort
mhm,
of impinging on me. You know, the Kantian principle to treat uh, humans as an end and never as a means.
mhm,
There's this Kantian principle that was inculcated. The what's it called? I think it's a moral imperative. Isn't that what it's called? The Kantian moral imperative. That to treat all humans and all people you interact with as ends in and of themselves and not as means. Um, how does
mhm,
that it was taught to us as the most precious and most valuable orientation for ethics and morals in the world, in civics. And the categorical imperative, that's what they call it. The categorical imperative, not the moral imperative.
um, okay. So we have to understand that the European philosophical project of the period of Kant
Hmm. End of 18th
was
century.
essentially about the achievement of a secularized philosophy. Okay,
Yes.
a philosophy that could stand with a state that had separated itself from the church and from a rationale in which God was at the center.
My lord, I have no use for that hypothesis. I don't remember who it was, Blaise Pascal explaining to some regent how the world and the universe is put together. And after his excurse, the king asks him, "But I listened to you with great interest. You made no mention of God at any point." Whereupon I think it was Blaise Pascal responds, "I have no utilization for that hypothesis in my."
Wasn't that his conversation with Napoleon?
It could be. I just
No,
remember sort
I
of
don't know. That's beyond me. I don't know. I don't have that.
just
I
that
don't have
anecdote.
that level of, and I never read Pascal.
Mm.
Uh,
But just sort of, it's sort of an anecdote that is
mm,
somewhere at the back of my mind that illustrates perhaps.
yes,
Um,
there's perfect illustration of it. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So in that is now the reconstruction. of the European politics, the European psyche, etc. Okay. And so in that story, in that narrative, there are aspects of the story which are left out. The wealth pouring into Europe at that time, the greatest source of wealth. I mean, a third of the French GDP came from Haiti alone. Right? That gives you an of the extent of the wealth that was coming out of those slave plantations.
Yes.
Okay. And at this point, at this hard interface between in the creation of the black and the white, in order to maintain an economic reality, of wealth extraction. Right? Because why do you need the white? At the point that you take these people on the slave ship and you have to maintain a crew who come from different places, speak many different languages, have a lingua franca often that which they speak badly. Okay, you need a supra-ethnic identity to manage that threat. You're like 20 people managing a ship full load of hundreds. Okay?
Yes.
Who, if they have a chance, they will kill you. At the same time, you've got in the hold people from many different places, many different nations, speaking different languages, having different cultures, etc. So at this point, the ethnic collapse happens, and what emerges is a supra-ethnic identity within which you can subsume people and control their identities for power and economic extraction on both sides. Okay? So then you end up, so this does not appear in the discourse at all. Right? This is the hidden underbelly that no one wants to talk about. Then they move on to the plantation and the project of the organization and the management of human bodies, right? And psyches to the production of cotton, cane, and
rum, sugar,
etc. This project was the ultimate expression of the biopolitical project, which is the management of bodies as property who are mortgaged, etc. This logic invades the logic of the European state and etc. It invades it. It invades the logic of the European identity. This is why Achille Mbembe identifies the origin of the biopolitical as the necropolitical. Okay? So this is important.
So, it is absolutely important, and it actually, it echoes the strong views by the German lawyer and consultant to the Third Reich, Carl Schmitt, who's very famously who famously posited that the sovereign is he who controls the state of emergency, he who declares the state of emergency, and that is the ultimate sovereign, that is the ultimate rest and source of power. And
yes,
that is exactly what you're describing here.
Yes. So basically, what I am saying is that because mercantilism, or the European project of expansion, was an economic project of the control of trade routes, the logic of that has dictated our identities. right? So the super ethnic identity of Black emerges out of that, at the same time that the super ethnic identity of white emerges. And in order to make the project eternal, it has to be extended backwards and forwards. Because that is man. Okay? So what does it mean? It means that the white is defined by its difference from the Black. We call it schizogenesis inside here. We call right. It defines itself like that. So that what happened in the other aspect of this project to have a secular civilization becomes the project of culture, which is a late 18th up to a 19th century project. So it is the creation of a bourgeois culture. So it has to be different. They have to distinguish themselves from the Black. So they have to distinguish themselves. They're not savages. Okay. So what happens is that you got two tensions. One is the breaking from the aristocratic foundations and this bourgeois crew coming up.
Yes.
Okay. So now they have to shape a definition of who they are. But this definition is a reactive definition. And so what happens is that they build a culture of imitation. They're imitating the aristocracy and create a non-aristocratic. So none of the states that they hold as being important, cultured, and civilized are often ones which they have experienced themselves. They have surmised what they are. Okay? And as they lose connection to any deep personal impulses, which Lacan would call the real, those rare, as they lose their connection to those, then they look at these other people and they start to imitate, right? So they want to extract experience which they lack, and so you get this whole shaping of an entire civilization, which is about the accoutrement, about the semblance of culture and civilization. So if you know this, if you have this, if you do this, you're cultured, right? It's not based upon what is inside. It is based upon the appearance. And this becomes the habit. So, and this has been excellent for the rise of a consumer society. This has been excellent for the rise of mass media, but right, or social media. Sorry, but the point is, the point here is that the necropolitical as a foundation is an act of violence to all of the people within the thing. And the point I'm coming to, and I'll stop, is that in it created a category called the human being and man, which is the restating of man. And so man was the cultured and the civilized. So if you were not man, you were the savage, right? Or the native. And so then the project of civilization, sorry?
Or the woman until 1968.
Precisely, or the woman. So what then the project becomes, which explains a lot of the disease of hysteria, the psychological disease of hysteria in the 19th century. Yeah. So the project becomes about the manufacture of man. So the project of nationhood, etc., becomes a project of the absorption of people into the definition of the human being and of man, as an economic creature, right?
As an economic creature.
Yeah.
That so you know I've checked. Meanwhile, it wasn't
Mhm.
Blaise Pascal. Apologies to the audience for misinforming you. It was Laplace.
Laplace is Napoleon.
Laplace, exactly, and it's about 100 years distance between Blaise Pascal and Laplace. So it is Laplace and not Blaise Pascal.
Right. One moment, I just need to step out for a moment. Could you? I'll leave you to take over, please.
Um, well, thanks for that. I sort of wanted to. The last point that Alex just made before leaving is the one I wanted to harp on a little bit and ask him to dig a bit deeper because he was saying the creation of an economic of a Homo economicus. And it's very interesting because just earlier, Alex was pointing out, and I s- sort of contributed to that with the illustration by erroneously mentioning Blaise Pascal when I meant Laplace, who, in explaining how the solar system works, is um, reported historically to have said to Napoleon, to whom he was explaining how the solar system works, when asked why he didn't mention God in his explanation of how the world works, um, then Laplace is to have said he had no use for that hypothesis. Just as the intellectuals who control the discourses of knowledge and the discourses of understanding of the world in which we live, both social, historical, and physical, just as they are getting rid of God as an explaining variable in their discourses, we find that the position of meta constructs like the invisible hand. What is the invisible hand? I've always wondered whose hand is it? A hand belongs to somebody, but they talk about the invisible hand as the key pointer towards techniques and processes of economic wealth and economic safety and economic blossoming, which then they expect to trickle down to benefit all in a capitalist or liberal capitalist society. And I was just about to ask Alex to zoom in on the simultaneity of the interest in God as an explaining variable. Alex, I was just about to come full circle that you ended on the note that uh, at the end of the day, all political and all identity based shaping of the people that make up society is intended to lead to an economic management of the people. The purposes of identity politics are economic and power and control. And
Hmm.
I wanted to sort of ask you what your thoughts are about the simultaneity in history almost of towards the end of the 18th century, the idea that God is no longer needed to explain the world. So the utility of explaining the world through divinity and God and metaphysics goes down, while at the same time, there's an increase in monetizing, commodifying, and economizing everything. With economizing everything, I mean transforming everything to a variable in an economic equation, everything and everybody. Uh, God goes down and up goes the Homo economicus. Uh,
Hmm.
do you have any thoughts on that observation?
Well, the Mercantilist project itself was about um, a of removing the strictures on trade that
Mm-hmm.
morality and religion placed upon it.
Mm.
So it was natural in that logic that you had to abandon God and morality and make morality as relative as possible, and that the only the only foundational principle was the efficiency and profitability of the market. That was so that's the religion. So all
You
we're
have
saying is the logic of is that logic emerging.
you have said so much. I want to invite the audience, when you have the
Mhm,
video, to fast forward to this part. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to play your last response in a loop until it clicks.
mhm,
Because there's so much in what you just said that really explains the essence of the article that is available this week. And it's so powerful because what you just said, if I could just if I just had it in my short-term memory to mirror back the wording, it's not the
mhm,
substance that you said, it's the wording you use. It
mhm,
brings us back straight to the Department of Government Efficiency.
mhm, mhm,
It brings us back right there. It brings us back to a guy with a team of teenagers
mhm,
looking at your social security numbers
mhm.
and determining whether you should or not receive the resources that biopolitics have allocated to your benefits,
Yes, yes. Universal income.
right? So the wording that you use, I wished I had it because you just put it in th- you just kind of summarized it perfectly well because you had the word efficiency in there at the right place.
Mhm, mhm,
You were pointing out that um, the way the government and the way power deals with individuals becomes a function in an economic equation.
mhm,
That's what is happening right now. And
mhm.
that then also increases the possibility of the human being becoming entirely exchangeable.
Yes, because I think that if you look at the bourgeois project, it is about the manufacture of the mercenary, right?
Thank you, because this brings us back to one of the 5 points in your article, which I think are essential. The manufacture, you say, of the mercenary in all domains because you're simply purchasable.
Yes,
Every every good or service that you can provide becomes a function of how available it is through money.
yes. So the slave plantation was about the coercion of human beings, the violent coercion of human beings to sell their life force, or to give their life force to coerce to the wealth of to increasing the wealth of a master.
Mm.
Okay, so it is about extracting in Marxist terms the surplus value of that body in our in our economy, right? Because it's about you of yourself selling yourself to for the extraction of the surplus value of your labor, right? That's it. It's you do it, and then you argue in that paradigm when the robot comes, okay. But there are other ways to organize economy, and that must never become part of what you think about, right? You What you think about are the inequities of the system,
Mm.
right? So this is the brilliance of the bourgeois project. It is brilliant. It is a brilliant reshaping of the human being, okay, with the market as his god and money as their highest principle, and
You know,
ethics to reduced to in where you in the past had morality, etc. You have no ethics to mitigate against the worst excesses of the mercenary.
it's fascinating that we're having this conversation because we are talking about the late 18th century, where all of this becomes institutionalized and rooted in the West, and then It begins before that, as you've been pointing out for a year at least now. It
Mm-hmm.
begins, you can see the vectors of it in the Bulla Papale, the
Mm-hmm.
papal bull.
Mm-hmm.
This is the 16th century
Mm-hmm.
we're talking. You can see it there, the roots are there. And now we're in 1780, 1785, 89,
Mm-hmm.
where many things are happening at the same time. One of the things happening is this enlightenment uh, uh, that goes hand in hand with the diminishment of clerical morality.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so the secularization that you mentioned goes hand in hand with the rise of the utilitarian mercantilist.
Yes, yes, yes.
And it goes hand in hand. I just sort of, it just strikes me, this categorical imperative, which is from Kant, formulated around the same time, which looks to me now, in light of our hindsight,
Mm-hmm.
like a warning, like an injunction, because probably he felt this was coming.
Well, you could see it. I mean, Hegel was about the manufacture of a was a Hegel was about the manu. How what does this human being have to be? What are can we have an ethics outside of how do we understand the materiality of the universe? But and in Hegel, the materiality of the universe is metaphysical, right? So we're talking about when we're talking about the Enlightenment, and we're talking about it through these processes, and we don't do the Foucauldian thing and expand the perspective. We come up with false narratives,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? Um, Look, in late 18th century, early 19th century, okay, the French and the British are battling for control
Yes.
of Europe.
Hmm.
There's Napoleon, the British embargo the French, and Napoleon responds and attempts to embargo the 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 British right across Europe, right?
Yes.
And
Successfully.
he conquers Europe, and he gathers it into a colonial system. What happens is that colonialism has now moved from the periphery back to the center. Nobody talks about that.
Yes.
Okay.
Hmm.
And
Yes.
what the Americans have just done, what the Americans did was they organized Europe into a colonial relationship with themselves in which the Europeans benefited. It rebuilt Europe. However,
Benef- Benefited to the point that they couldn't even see that in their fractal identity, they're just a colonial periphery.
precisely. And so what is happening now is that as the Americans are losing the peace, they are attempting to reorganize the colonial relationships in ways that the Europeans are beginning to balk and realize, oh my God, but they haven't realized that the Americans have colonized utterly their fractal identities, which is why we have American style racism on European streets, right?
Yes.
Europeans have their own kind of racism, right? But now we have American style racism on European street, and the Europeans didn't have just one type of racism. I mean, the racism of the Belgians is very different from the racism of the French,
Hmm.
right? Which is why the French were more successful in that way. I mean, because the French were a lot more inclusive,
And
right?
what? And yes, definitely, definitely. But another facet of this that I'm fascinated by through the conversation is the realization, as I listen to you, the importance of De Gaulle, uh, or how does the difference between Germany's absolute groveling sycophancy come about, and how does the French kind of standoffish, let's walk together, but I'm at a distance, I have my own nukes? How does that, the distinction between the fractal identities that France and Germany have as peripheries of the US,
Mhm.
where the French still have a little bit of a semblant of spine in all of
Well,
this.
because the French were able to keep their colonies.
They could keep their colonies until the 63-ish, until
No, the
63-ish.
French have kept. The French have basically kept their colonies. The
I
national
get you.
identities,
I get you. I
right,
get it.
were still there's. This is the point. The nation itself is a technology of colonialism. It
The
is a
nation.
colonial technology. If you have a central bank and you're
That's it.
banking, you're a colony.
With the central, with the with the currency, the CFR.
Yeah. I mean, but what I'm saying is that the like the Chinese have managed to redesign banking in their interest, and that's a problem that can never work, right? That's part of the problem that it still has the same problems, okay,
Yep.
but it's now redesigned in enough of their interest to become a challenge.
It is independent to a high degree from the infrastructure of the originators of the economic world order we live in.
Precisely, precisely. And so and the Chinese attitude is different, which is more of a give and take attitude, right?
Hmm.
Because they understand if you depend upon me, it's all right. Your control. If you depend upon me, and I facilitate this for you, right? And nobody else is challenging me, it's fine. You're dependent upon me. That's another kind of power. Yeah. So I think what we have to realize, because when we're talking about, it's important why I published that article, because when we're talking about the liberation of Palestine or the liberation of Syria or the liberation of Congo, to what? To this, right? To this economic system, right? That's the definition of liberation. So that's why we have to have the conversation about what it cannot be, right?
The
Because people go,
conclusion.
okay, well, what's your alternative? Well, do I need to have an alternative? Because first of all, if you can look at that kind of slavery in the face and it's
Hmm.
okay with you, then we
Hmm.
cannot have a conversation about liberation. It's a waste of time. I'm sorry, I think we've overrun the time.
We've run over time, but you have given extremely important passages in this audio, in this video, that I
Mm-hmm.
strongly recommend, because I know now that there are three passages that I've marked for revisiting,
Mm-hmm.
that I just didn't have the right questions to drill down at the profundity of what you said.
Mm-hmm.
Because
Mm-hmm.
in part, I think I am also guilty of uh, a low degree of literacy on this encompassing system that we evolve in. Everything we do evolves and unfolds in this economic system, and based on the coding of the economic language. So we are now, with this article, what you've done, I find that extremely important, is you've provided those of us who want to think about unmasking also the economic reality that we live in, the economic framework that we live in, that, and I want to use the word determines.
Mm-hmm.
I could use the word conditions, but I want to use the word determines how
I
we,
agree with you. I think it's deterministic. Its
right?
logic is
Because
deterministic.
exactly, and it's deterministic because, you know, a conditioning is something that you may be more or less aware of. But the, let us say, the lower the degree of awareness, the lower the degree of literacy about conditions that impinge on your life, the
Mm-hmm.
higher the degree of determinism in them. Because the
Mm-hmm.
higher the degree of awareness and consciousness about the framework within which you evolve, I
Mm-hmm.
think the lower the degree of determination or determinism
Yes.
on you.
Yeah.
And
Or the because I used to believe that all you had to do was educate people.
you used to.
I
Why
used
do
to.
you think?
I spent 30 years with people who were talking about these things. And what I saw was that human beings can be caught in a psychodrama. If there are certain things that you will not confront,
Yeah.
then you produce psychodramas in order not to deal with it. And in order
Ooh.
to deal with it poetically,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So poetically
Mm.
you deal with it, so you're okay, but you don't change the reality of your life or the
Wow.
foundations of that thing. And so I've realized that because look, we have Foucault,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
By the time you're finished studying Foucault, you'll go, oh my God, this is so encompassing. What the hell can I do?
What can I do?
Right? And I think that's why I kind of post Foucault, I began to talk about things like overgrowing, right? This we have to
Must be.
be able to reconnect to those deep human impulses for realization, not even self-realization. That's still within the Enlightenment discourse, right? Because the human being is not. There is an aspect of the human being. You are an individual locus, but you are in relation with other locuses, and you need other locuses. You cannot reproduce alone, right? So this fixation upon the individual and the autonomy of the individual is in its sense anti-people. And so it is the means by which you castrate a people in the mistaken belief that by the realization of the needs of the individual,
Mm-hmm.
right, that they will be liberated. So a human being looking to liberate all of their impulses,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, oh no. And so they enter into a project which is a trap, which is the remaking of themselves,
Mm-hmm.
which is politically castrated. So
Yes.
all of that in the Enlightenment, because when Napoleon took when Napoleon basically colonized Europe, it was a
Mm-hmm.
colonial project.
Yes.
In the continental system. He as I said, they liberated the serfs. They liberated the serfs to wage work, etc., in the cities.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and restructured the European, and out of that came nationalism. They came nationalism as um, nationalism as liberation, but in fact, nationalism was about no, we can run our own colonial reality here,
Yes.
right? So the export of that's why when I talk about, I say that the export of nationalism, of the nationalist ideology was itself a trap, or is itself a trap. But in our kind of understanding, that it doesn't make any, within the parameters of our logic, that does not make sense. And so what I'm saying is that we even have to question, that is even up for question. Because if you look at the parameter of the nature of, if you achieved all of your nationalist objectives
Mm-hmm.
from the perspective of being liberated, then you will realize that it is not.
Absolutely, because there still is this what the Marxists would call a superstructure?
Well, basically, okay. And I think after this we have to
Yeah.
finish.
Yeah.
If you think about it, the politically freest people are hunter-gatherers. They gather maybe 3 or 4 hours a day and the rest of the day they can do what they like. They can tell stories. They can do that, right? Now, as what we see is that as we enter, and I'm not subscribing to this whole overarching narrative that says that it is the economic relationship with agriculture that enslaves human beings. Right? That's nonsense.
I mean, we could start a conversation about that, but then we'd run out even more. But of
Even
time.
more. Yeah. So the point here is that in what our idea of culture, liberation, and civilization is to plug in as a node on a colonial system, and hopefully to be able to manage that to your benefit. If you plug into that, you have no ambition. It's ambitionless.
But your career is secured.
Well, no. You're not your career. You are guaranteed that you will be fed.
Fractal identity
Yeah.
congruence.
Yes.
This is so beautiful. You know what you've done to me in this conversation. For some reason, as I listen
Mm-hmm.
to you repeatedly point to the distinction between the node and the collective,
Mm-hmm.
I can't help but think of the particle wave dualism conversation in physics. I don't know why, but it sort of struck me listening to you that there's something going on here. There's an isomorphic semblance going on here between the individual, in the moment, being observed in doing what we do based
Okay.
on autonomy.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. So what we have to recognize is that the project of physics
Mm-hmm.
is a cosmological project, and as a cosmological project, it is subject to, in Lacanian terms, the same symbolic order. So
There
the
we go.
description of the materiality of the universe
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
is actually a description of you.
Whew. Fractal identity the other way around.
Yes, and I mean the person was it the great Andalusian Sufi Sheikh Ibn Arabi.
Mm-hmm.
He said that when man makes a model of the universe, he makes a model of himself.
Oh, there you go.
Right.
There you go. There you
So
go.
our so that there you'll see our politics there, because that's what we've done. We've just and that is the nature of every cosmological project. It cannot be held.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
It just struck me, the way we were talking about, but still, I feel like we didn't do the article justice today, because I really feel that there were parts. I mean, just look at the again, to our
Mm-hmm.
audience, please go to Dystopia Unmasked article selection, and when you're there, just go straight to recommended further reading, where you have unbelievable sources that allow you to deepen what
Mm-hmm.
Alex has been telling us here in very good ways. Among other things, there's Karl Marx in this week's names there, recommended readings and sources. There's Hudson, Killing the Host: How Financial Parasites and Debt Destroy the Global Economy. An absolutely important read. One of my favorites, Polanyi, is in there, The Great Transformation: The Political and Economic Origins of Our Time. So my first recommendation is go to the sources, have a look at the sources that Alex proposes. Some of the books in there contributed to changing the way I understand reality. And the article itself provides you with two segments of bullet points. The first of three bullet points, and the second of five, if my memory is correct, bullet points, which, if you read nothing today, if you read nothing this week, please go to those bullet points in the article. They will stimulate you to read the article. But if
Mm-hmm.
you don't have
Mm-hmm.
any time whatsoever, just read the premise of the bullet points and the bullet points, and
Mm-hmm.
you will
Mm-hmm.
go away richer in your understanding of the economic realities that we move within, of today and of the moment. If you do nothing this week, read those bullet points in the article that Alex wrote this week. It will stimulate you to reading the article in full. And if you don't have time for that, it will equip you, it will enrich you with sort of handy points to describe what is going on around you right this
Right.
moment. So I'd like to thank you for unmasking that aspect of the reality we live in. I'd like to thank you for touching on the implications of these aspects for our day to day life today. The preponderance of the economic language that we speak, that we swim in, but that we don't necessarily consciously uh, analyze and deconstruct. And I hope you'll be doing more of this for us. I personally need that because I need that literacy. I need more literacy in seeing the way our economic reality is coded. And so I'm very grateful for this article. It did that job for me personally. Maybe others might be more literate. It might not have the same impact for others, but it had that for me. And I think I could see it in this conversation, showing me the decline of the importance of the categorical imperative in our day-to-day lives, and the increase of the economic patterns that shape the marketplace that you have laid bare. Even though they're occulted and far removed from, you don't just stumble, you don't just come upon them.
Yeah, but you come up, but you are subject to their consequence as mysterious forces,
Exactly.
such as inflation, right? Which means that your wealth is losing value because of the rate of money creation
Yes.
done, right? Which is completely occult. So you'll be going, oh, we don't know how it happens. Well, once you study it, you realize, oh my God, it is self-explanatory. Okay, well, I think it's now 11:32. We've done an extra half an hour, so yeah.
And again, my gratitude goes to you for touching on this complex subject, for revealing what is under the hood, and my invitation to the audience to please read the article, leave your comments, and very important, this is an ask. It's a genuine ask, because I ask you to share these articles, the ones you appreciate, with whoever you know to be of such inclinations, of such ability to absorb this and ability to make use of this. Please do share. Talk about these things with your friends. This is an active ask of you, because Dystopia Unmasked will blossom if you help others uh, um, draw their attention to these articles that Alex is writing. I promise to contribute myself, and we need you to keep these
Yeah.
articles alive through conversation, dialogue, and attention. We need your attention on these materials that are being put up. It's a
Yes.
it's an active ask I have of you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So please follow us on Substack. Please engage, share, discuss. I think it's really important. We really have to expand our literacy of our politics, economics, how our psychology is shaped by these processes, etc. We have to,
Absolutely,
uh, and
absolutely,
and we, and we have to do that, especially if you wish to be truly liberated.
exactly. Thank you very much, Alex, and see you on Dystopia Unmasked on Substack. See you there.
Okay,
Thank you.
pleasure. Thank you guys for coming, etc. And look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much. Stick around, look around. See you. Bye bye.